In all her diversity, the African continent is particularly exposed to shocks, and the risk of losing decades of development accomplishments is conspicuous. In the context of the pandemic, building resilience for a broad range of society becomes even more pertinent, but the frameworks for the same remain under-discussed. It is against this backdrop that Africa is having the privilege of hosting the 19th Biennial IASC Conference 2023. This conference returns to Africa after 20 years under the theme, The Commons We Want, between historical legacies and future collective actions. This conference will be hosted by the University of Nairobi in collaboration with the University of Bern and other global partners. This is the first of the 7 days that this conference is expected to run as global stakeholders come together to discuss the future, not just for Africa, but for the world. From as far back when the preliminary concepts of the commons emerged, to the year 2020, when the world was literally locked down due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the concept of the commons has evolved to include a wider scope of issues that were never before considered as commons.
So this understanding of the commons is important for us to keep our use of natural resources, keep our security in terms of climate change as a people, and even keep national security. You see, the violence in northern Kenya is because a lot of pastoralist communities have lost access to their grazing areas. So they're now clashing over the little that's remaining. So it's also a security issue. It's not just a food and resource use issue. It also affects security of communities.
I see commons as an institutional arrangement through which a group of people can actually participate in the decision-making process and also to distribute the limited resources in equitable and also fair ways.
Any shared property must be regarded as a common. So even if the coat that you are wearing is a property that is shared among the family, for example, this smoke, I can classify as a shared property because if I die, my next generation can use this. So it becomes a shared property, which its management should not only be regarded as something that is my bona fide property, but rather it should be seen as something that belongs to all.
Political aspects of the commons, it's in a way a voluntary cooperation among people who jointly defend a territory that they could not defend alone. So they must form a community to do that. And that makes them strong.
Health is eminently private. It is your highest asset. But if you get ill from infectious disease, but also from non-communicable disease like pollution, it becomes social and public. So health has obviously a very important public dimension, and therefore I think addressing it with a commons approach that is of general interest and that seeks the benefit for everybody is a very valuable approach.
The reality, however, is the commons are missing in many international treaties, and therefore the need to mainstream core issues regarding the commons, such as conservation, sustainable development, and relooking the viable futures of the local issues and local communities.
The question was asked, right now, what we are enjoying, will our children and grandchildren find them?
But the conference brings the idea of the commons to the table. And I want to take cognizance of the presence of the Prime Cabinet Secretary of Kenya, that bringing him to speak about the commons at the opening ceremony is like taking the idea of the commons to the government of Kenya.
The future of the commons is facing serious threats. And this agenda that we have started today would have been better if it is followed up without disconnection, so that the issues that have been conversed here do not just die. They are escalated, particularly to the political level, to inform policy, but also down to the local level to support activities that will help to bring back the life as we know it of the commons.
This is the ideology behind the Biennial International Association for the Study of the Commons, IASC 2023 conference that makes a return to Africa after 20 years with an aim to converge a transdisciplinary community that could help change the world for the better.
The transdisciplinary nature of our community, the idea that we have economists here, management people here, political sciences people here, anthropologists here, sociologists here, practitioners from many different sectors here. I'm leaving out important people that I'm not pulling up.
Geographers are coming, other different scholars are coming, which means that dealing with the problem of land is not only for one discipline, but it is interdisciplinary. And that makes it very interesting when you have such a conference where different people come from different fields to help.
I meet fellow academics who can teach me theories, who can teach me successful case studies, important failures that I can take home, both into my own organizing practice and into my scholarship. And I meet practitioners who are doing it, who are able to tell me, Seth, this theory you've developed, it didn't help me much, but this other theory that you accidentally mentioned, it's very useful to me. Bridging this gap between academics and practitioners is very important and very hard.
The IASC has been shaping the debate on alternative development pathways by way of putting the commons at the center stage. Through the theme, The Commons We Want, Between Historical Legacies and Future Collective Actions, the IASC 2023 conference engaged participants from across the globe.
We've been able to have a wider spread of participants in the conference, which to me has made it very successful. And you could just see with the number of abstracts you were able to receive, around 600 of them.
We did. We all came together. We made this happen. The people in Europe, the people here in Africa, and even every single person here. The people that were at the front desk handing out the tags, and the people that were feeding us and cooking for us, and even the people someone came and met me at the airport and make sure that I got in a taxi because I didn't know where I was going, and so we all cooperated, we all came together.
My feeling is that this conference is important because it has made us meet and discuss people working on the commons in Asia, in Europe, in the Americas, everywhere, and see the importance of the different approaches.
Coming here, I've been able to network with people. After my presentation yesterday, I got an opportunity to have a meeting with a guy from India who is also pursuing his PhD in the University of Kassel. And this collaboration wouldn't have been obtained without coming here.
Actually, I thank everybody who was able to travel to Nairobi after COVID. This was a very important step to get everybody back here. We also provided the options for people to come online who couldn't make it. And I thank as well all the teams who were working behind the scenes to make that happen.
Through the 6 days of conference engagement, the 2023 conference was presented to the physically present and virtual audience through 11 sub-themes, namely, Our Common SDGs, Commons Towards Urban Transformation, Indigenous Peoples and Globalization, Commons Between Colonial Legacies and the Anthropocene, Modeling and Multi-Methods Approaches in Polycentric Commons Systems, The Drama of the Grabbed Commons, Global Health Commons Between Pandemics and Local Health, Opportunities and Challenges of Digital Commons, conservation, environmental justice, and the commons. Local institution building and radical futures for the commons, advances in frameworks and theory.
I had actually two panels. One was in the SDG focus, and really, I mean, food is the second SDG, so no hunger, and that relates to many questions of what I do in my research. But then the other panel I had was on traditional irrigation, and that's of course related to food as well, because traditional irrigation is an agriculture practice, so it's practiced to produce food in the end.
My relation to the commons is research in fisheries, wildlife and pasture management, and finding reasons why these resources are actually overused. And I think also it became clear from many of the panels that the root causes lie into long-term grabbing of the commons, not just the land, but also the resources which are on these lands.
And one of the panels that I attended, there was a very strong persuasion that science should change. But that was also followed by another question. Is there a need to change science if the current science is not even influencing processes? So the big question is what should change at these three different levels: at the grassroots level, at the science level, and at the policy level.
Alongside the breakout sessions, the delegates were engaged through keynote sessions in the areas of Whose Commons by Mordecai Ogada, the contribution of indigenous people to globalization despite our exclusion in the same by Milka Chepkorir, Wallowing in Adaptation while Neck Deep in Vulnerability towards Structural Climate Response by Jesse Ribot, and finally, On Taking Back the Commons, Decommodification and Deconcentration by Ruth Hall and Monieba Isaacs.
The keynote was one of the well-delivered speech, and it mainly touched on the conservation. Because for many years, those are not my words from the speaker, conservation is very critical, but it has also come out that those driving the conservation agenda probably have also not been doing it for the common person.
Yeah, so what triggered me, I think, in both keynotes so far was this whole question about decolonialization and really the question, like, who is the colonizer? And I mean, I fully agree with many things that have been said, and especially in the keynotes, but I think there are also open questions about, to be more specific about what we mean by certain things, like if we talk about colonizers. So who are the colonizers?
Why are people vulnerable? And that's what my talk was about. That is to say, when you have a storm, it is a hazard. A hazard meets vulnerability and it causes damage. The problem is, without the vulnerability, there's no damage. Without the storm, there's no damage. Both are necessary, but the climate modelers who look at the damage side, what they call the impacts of these hazards, they fail to really get a good look at the causes of vulnerability, which are rooted in long histories of exploitation, racism, colonialism, that pushed people into these marginal spaces often.
My ideology was that science has sort of lost its way, particularly in conservation. What we are doing right now in conservation science is we are pushing the dreams of David Livingstone, and we are pushing the dreams of George Adamson and Theodore Roosevelt. Those people who saw our wildlife and our natural resources with external eyes as something to be exploited, something either to be hunted or something to be fenced so they can own it, and they have a capitalist viewpoint.
The conference delegates were treated to in-conference and post-conference excursions. The in-conference excursion took 3 routes that allowed the delegates to discover the commons within Nairobi through the Ngong Windmills, the Nairobi National Park, Bomas of Kenya, and the city slums. The post-conference excursion took guests through 2 routes. The first group took the exploration of the commons to the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro, while the second group surveyed the commons towards the slopes of Mount Kenya.
I must say the experience we had yesterday in the field excursions, the feedbacks that I have received independently from the persons who attended, not from the organizing committee, shows that our committee did a wonderful job and the progress is laudable.
Several nationalities were present in the historic 2023 conference. Over 450 delegates attended the conference physically in Nairobi, Kenya, at the University of Nairobi, while several others attended online.
I notice now that these happenstance interactions that you have, oh, let's grab dinner, and just these spontaneous conversations that come out of in-person interactions is so important, and that's what we missed.
So the representation more from the Global South would have added more value in my opinion, but we all know that the commons is an interesting concept which we can now pick up after this conference. It is my hope that we will have more active participation from the Global South.
So for me, seeing participants coming, it's a clear demonstration that really we have a goodwill to move forward, and there's hope for our current and of course future generation if we keep this spirit and also have honest conversation, and not only have the conversations but also action the talks that we really have. Then that will be really helpful towards the our global achieving the commons that we want.
Key lessons were learned, networks established, and acquaintances reactivated as scholars, researchers, and policy makers interacted through various conference sessions and engagements, including the networking reception organized by the Swiss Embassy and the final closing dinner.
So for me, that is a key element in that we are thinking about sustainability. We are actually having people who are looking into the future and they are part of the process. We are not just discussing about youth in commons, but youth in commons are contributing their ideas during the discussions.
So thank you. I think this was a good conference. It has brought a lot of learned people together. I've learned quite a lot, especially on the historical context. And I can now be able even to articulate some way forward, a bit of some way forward, though we're still there.
This has just reaffirmed what we have been working on as anthropologists in relation to nature, environment, people, health, energy, water resources. The idea of commoning has always been on the table for anthropologists.
You know, I don't know if you had the possibility to attend the dinner last night, but we all got up and all of us were dancing. It's silly fools dancing together, joyfully celebrating that we did this. And there wasn't any alcohol or, we were just dancing on joy. So that's what I think I learned.
And I think the take-home message is we should collaborate and more activities, and also I would say the shared knowledge and also share research with each other to address the problem of the common that we have to face now.
As a researcher, we are already seeing some grounds for research topics. And now that I'm talking as a researcher, we've already seen there are some gaps, and this can be done by masters and PhD or postdoc.
And I've also seen that there are different or diversities of commons. So when it's talk about common, it's not only associated with land, but you can even have intellectual commons, we can have commons in space and other types, which previously I didn't know, but this conference has actually taught me this.
The phenomenon of creativity and thought And knowledge is with us every moment. Random selection is a much slower process. People cope through their knowledge, and their knowledge is being excluded by a term like adaptation in the first place. So in a way, I think adaptation as a term was chosen because when you look at adaptation, you don't ask, why do they have to adapt? As in, why are they suffering? You ask, how do they adapt? You focus only on the how, but you can't get to the how without the why. If you say somebody is vulnerable or at risk, the question is why. Why evokes the histories of the production of pain and suffering and marginality, and that is what we need to focus on if we want to, in fact, have the full repertoire of possible solutions.
I think there are twofold calls. First, we have to continue research on these grabbing processes, But secondly, we also see that it's not just a drama of the grabbed commons. It's not just, a tragedy of the grabbed commons. It's a drama of the grabbed commons. So that actually local people are reacting to this, and we have to study also this reaction in order to understand how also science and scientific research can best help to support local communities in the struggle to regain the commons.
The commons must be guided going forward, because what has happened affecting the commons negatively may not be able to be reversed. But what will happen going forward can be effectively regulated for the future generations of the world. And for that, I call upon, as I have said, the practice at the lowest level, science and the policy and the politics must work together to secure the commons towards realizing the theme of this conference of the commons we want.
The commons and access to the commons is the highest form of civilization. The fact that Africans can live with commons, share water sources, share forests, share fisheries without anyone paying or being locked out is the highest form of civilization. The West, where people have to pay for everything and access to everything, is uncivilized.
This marks the end of the 19th Biennial IASC Conference 2023 that has been held here at the University of Nairobi. The 6-day conference included more than 110 panel conversations, plenary sessions by thought-provoking keynote speakers such as Milka Chepkorir, Dr. Mordecai Ogada, and Jesse Ribot. These discussions, held under the theme, The Commons We Want, between historical legacies and future collective actions, have brought to the fore conversations around decolonization, decommoditization, and the decentralization of systems governing shared resources, especially for vulnerable and indigenous communities. Following these deliberations, the delegates leave this place not just enlightened, but empowered to go and implement these ideas in their various spaces. For Africa, that has had the privilege of hosting this prestigious conference for the second time since it began, the conversation has started, and it is now in our court to ensure that we put in all the efforts required to ensure that we achieve the commons that we want.